Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Kim, and today we're embarking on a pretty fascinating masterclass to uncover the hidden world of light and molecules using UV visible spectroscopy. Have you ever wondered how scientists figure out the exact concentration of a sample just by shining a light through it? Or, why certain chemicals just pop with these brilliant, vibrant colors while others are completely transparent? Well, you're in the right place. Let's get started with this complete explainer. So here's our game plan for today. We'll hit 1. Introduction and overview, 2. Basic theory, 3. Terms used in UV, 4. Instrument design, 5. UV vis spectra interpretation, and finally, 6. Applications in science. Let's jump right in. Section 1. Introduction and overview, unlocking the secrets of color. Okay, so why do some chemical solutions look brilliantly colored while others are just completely invisible? To solve this chemical mystery, we really have to look at the electromagnetic spectrum. Specifically, we're talking about the range spanning from 190 to 800 nanometers. Now, ultraviolet light from 190 to 400 nanometers is completely invisible to our eyes. But from 400 to 700 nanometers, that's where the magic happens. That's the visible light spectrum that our eyes actually perceive as color. The core principle here is absolutely crucial. The color you actually observe in a beaker is the exact complement of the wavelength that the substance absorbs. It's not reflecting the color it takes in, it's basically showing you the leftovers. This color wheel brilliantly illustrates that cosmic dance of light. For instance, let's say a molecule absorbs blue light, right in that 430 to 480 nanometer range. Well, our eyes are going to perceive the solution as the direct opposite on the wheel, a brilliant orange. If it absorbs at 520 nanometers, which is green, the solution is going to look red to us. This is the whole visual baseline for understanding UV visible spectroscopy. Section 2. Basic theory, the quantum jump. Think of an electron in a molecule kind of like an athlete waiting on the starting block. This is what we call the ground state. When a photon of light hits the molecule, it acts like this massive burst of energy. According to the equation E equals hv, that's energy equals Planck's constant times frequency, if that photon has the precise amount of energy required, the electron absorbs it and makes a literal quantum jump to a higher, excited energy level. But here's the catch. That jump only happens if the photon's energy perfectly matches the gap between those two specific states. No match, no jump. So the really important thing is understanding these specific jumps or electronic transitions. We have really high energy jumps, like a bonding sigma to an antibonding sigma star, which happen below 150 nanometers in the far UV range. Think of your simple alkanes for that one. But transitions involving an electron from a non-bonding lone pair jumping to an antibonding pi orbital, an N to pi star transition, well, those require the lowest energy. This means they actually absorb at longer visible wavelengths, above 250 nanometers. So if a molecule absorbs in the visible region, it typically features these lower energy transitions involving double bonds and lone pairs. Moving right along to Section 3, terms used in UV, the vocabulary of light. First up, we need to talk about the chromophore. This is the functional group, or really just the part of a molecule containing multiple bonds, that is responsible for absorbing radiation and imparting color. Think of the chromophore like an unsaturated carbon double bond, maybe an azo group or carbonyl group, as the primary engine of light absorption within the molecule. It's exactly where those pi to pi star or N to pi star transitions are actually happening. Next, we have the oxochrome. If the chromophore is the engine, oxochromes are basically the engine's tuning chips. By themselves, groups like hydroxyls, amines, or halogens don't really absorb UV light meaningfully. But the moment you attach them to a chromophore, their lone pairs interact with the chromophore's pi system and they vividly modify its behavior, almost always deepening the color. Now, how do we actually measure all this? Well, when we place a sample into our instrument, it detects transmittance. That's simply the percentage of light that successfully passes straight through the sample without being absorbed. But transmittance isn't perfectly linear with concentration, so we do a little math and convert it into absorbance. By using the famous Beer-Lambert Law, which relates absorbance directly to the path length and the molar absorptivity, we can quantitatively determine the exact concentration of our mystery sample. Structural changes in the molecule or even shifting the solvents can move our data around like a compass. On the horizontal axis, if the absorption peak moves to a longer wavelength, usually due to increased conjugation, we call that a bathochromic shift or a red shift. Moving to a shorter wavelength is a hypsochromic or blue shift. Now on the vertical axis, if the absorption intensity suddenly goes up, that's a hyperchromic shift. And if it drops, it's a hypochromic shift. Master these 4 specific terms, and you can read a spectrum like a map. Section 4. Instrument Design. Building a spectrophotometer. The architecture of a spectrophotometer is honestly a marvel of precision engineering. The light begins its journey from a source bulb. We're usually talking about a deuterium lamp for UV and a tungsten lamp for visible light. It passes through an entrance slit and hits what's called a monochromator. This dispersion device, kind of like a prism, divides that white light into a spread of narrow, specific wavelengths. An exit slit then isolates just the exact wavelength we want, let's say 260 nanometers. This isolated beam passes through our sample cell, the cuvette, and whatever light isn't absorbed finally hits a highly sensitive detector to give us our reading. Now, there are 2 main ways to build this setup. A single beam setup has just one optical path. It's definitely cheaper, but you have to measure your blank reference separately, wait, and then measure your sample. If your light bulb flickers or degrades even slightly between those 2 steps, boom, your data is inaccurate. A double beam instrument totally solves this. It uses a beam splitter to divide the light into 2 paths, simultaneously measuring the sample and the reference blank. It automatically and continuously compensates for any light source fluctuations, giving you way higher accuracy. It's a real game changer. Section 5. UV Vis Spectra Interpretation. Decoding the data. When we're looking at a peak on a graph, we have to account for several factors that can mess with absorbance and wavelengths. Solvent polarity can pull a peak one way or another. pH changes can alter an oxychrome like a phenol group. But most importantly, extended conjugation, meaning adding more alternating double bonds, dramatically lowers the required excitation energy, causing a massive redshift. In fact, this is so incredibly predictable that we can use empirical generalizations known as the Woodward rules to actually calculate and predict the exact absorption peaks of dienes and enones before we even set foot in the lab to run the experiment. Because of this, interpreting a spectrum isn't just a guessing game, it's a very logical step-by-step investigation. First, you note your structural clues. Second, you find the peak of the curve, the maximum wavelength of absorption, known as lambda max, and you identify your potential chromophores. Third, you apply those Woodward-based rules. And finally, keep in mind that UV vis is rarely used in total isolation to find a structure. We pretty much always combine it with infrared or NMR data to definitively nail down the molecular structure. And our final section, Section 6, Applications in Science, Why It Matters. In the biology world, researchers use UV vis every single day for quantifying DNA concentrations by measuring absorbance exactly at 260 nanometers. They use it at 280 nanometers to measure proteins. Over in materials science, it's used for monitoring the distinct plasmon resonance of gold nanoparticles, or even for measuring thin film thickness. From pharmaceutical impurity detection to monitoring photocatalysts, UV vis is just an absolute analytical powerhouse. Every single molecule has a distinct optical fingerprint. For example, we see DNA absorbing at 260 nanometers, totally colorless and invisible to our eyes. But jump up to the visible spectrum and we see the intense orange of beta-carotene absorbing right around 450 to 480 nanometers, and that's due to its massive conjugated polyene chain. Or look at potassium permanganate, absorbing at 525 nanometers via a charge transfer transition, giving it that iconic deep purple color we see in titration labs all over the world. It truly is a remarkable universe of light and chemistry out there, so the next time you see a vibrant color in a dye, a green leaf, or just a crystal clear liquid in a lab, take a second and ask yourself, what invisible quantum leaps are happening right before your eyes? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer on UV visible spectroscopy. Keep exploring and keep asking questions about the light that shapes our world.